Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2021 science fiction film Dune. Now, this is one of those films that, for whatever reason, I actually did not see until fairly recently. And honestly, I know the reasons why. It's not a whatever reason kind of thing. The reasons why are this: I was leery of it because I didn't like the trailers. I thought the trailers made the film look really dull. I didn't like the visual style. It lacked the style and the pomp and the flair that I had seen before with Denis as a director, specifically in something like Blade Runner 2049. So I was like, why is everything so brown and dull and gray looking? What is going on here? This should be an epic film. It should have this really just epic look and feel and size and scope to it, and it just looks really bland visually. I also wasn't really sold on Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides or Zendaya, and I'm one of the few people that actually likes David Lynch's Dune, so that was another factor. Then the fact that it was closer to the book didn't really mean anything to me because I, to this day, have still never read the novel. So a lot of the things that were huge selling points for people when it comes to this version of Dune, other than Denis directing it, who I'm a big fan of when it comes to his filmography, Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, there really wasn't a lot that was drawing me to it, other than maybe a little bit of curiosity to see what this take on Dune would be, how different it would be from David Lynch's approach to Dune. So then you throw in the fact that due to the reviews that I read, that it was essentially as if you stopped reading a book halfway through, and it's not a complete story. It doesn't have a genuine beginning, middle, and end. It just ends at a random point, and it's not really a satisfying conclusion to the first part of the film or the first part of what is supposed to be a multi-part series of films. It just turned me off on the movie. All of those factors combined really turned me off on it. And I didn't really decide to check it out until recently, only because I decided that I was going to go and see part two. And so I finally watched this in 4K after all these years. And I got to be honest here, I wasn't really a big fan of this. I thought this was pretty disappointing. And at best, pretty mediocre. And I know that's something that a lot of people are going to disagree with. I mean, there are reviews that call it an awe inspiring masterpiece. There are plenty of other reviews online, written or in video format, just praising the movie. And if you're one of those people that loves this film, that's great. That's awesome. More power to you. I wanted to like the particular spice that this film was trying to flow into me via the screen, but I didn't. It was more like the cinnamon challenge than anything else. It left me coughing and crying by the end of the movie because I was just in pain by how just stunningly average this film was, and honestly fairly forgettable. uh, the best way I would describe Dune Part 1 is that it really does play out like 3 or 4 episodes of a Dune streaming series for Netflix or Amazon Prime that's just stitched together. It didn't really feel like much of a film. And I know there are other movies that have been based on long novels or multiple novels that have been split up in a similar sort of way, like Lord of the Rings, for instance. But still, Fellowship of the Ring still felt like its own fairly cohesive story, and it worked as a standalone film, and so did The Two Towers, and so does Return of the King. All three of them work as standalone films. I don't really think this film works that well as a standalone movie because so much of it is just exposition and character depth and not much else. And it's not like the exposition and the character depth is done in a way that's particularly enthralling or exciting, at least to me personally. So a lot of the time, it's just boring. It's directed by Denis Villeneuve, and the direction is not a problem here. I personally would have liked to have seen a little bit more color, a little bit more uh, uh, pop visually, and not have everything be so dark and dingy looking. I get why it looks that way, but at the same time, I don't like the way it looks visually. It looks dirty. And I think that was intentional. Like they created some special filter for it, which is specifically supposed to look like there's sand on the lens or something. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. Yeah, I want to see a movie from a filmmaker who is known for his visionary style and for his flair for just stunning imagery. And I want to see a movie that looks like the camera is covered in sand. Like I don't understand that thought process. And it leads to a fair amount of scenes in this movie where things are way too dark. You can barely see what's going on in some scenes. And it really takes away from the spectacle when it comes to some of the sequences featuring Arrakis or other parts of the Dune mythos or the landscapes that are featured throughout Dune as a whole. And visually, it just makes a lot of the imagery just run together, and it doesn't really have a lot of moments where it really pops other than some scenes that take place in outer space showing some spaceships, maybe a few sequences involving the sandworms, maybe some moments with Paul having these dreams about this mysterious woman in the desert. But other than that, a lot of the film visually, it looks just completely and totally unimpressive to me. And that's really a letdown considering that Denny is such a dynamic and just unbelievable filmmaker. He's such a talented director. And to have a film that just looks so dull visually really feels like you're kind of taking away the strengths of Denny as a director. And I don't know if this was his choice or if it was somebody else involved with the production that decided to shoot the film this way. Whoever's decision it was, I think it was misguided. I genuinely do. The movie looks like it has a sand filter on it, and it just has this dark brown, gray color tone throughout that I guess is trying to look like it's a desert. That makes for a really dull looking movie visually. Uh, and everything's just muted in terms of the colors, almost to the point of it becoming completely totally black or sepia tone. So yeah, I just was not a fan of the direction as a whole. There were some shots, like some of the few moments of spectacle in the movie, like some of the attacks on the spice harvester machines, the attack on Arrakis. Like there were a few sequences that had some sort of action or had some epic stunts or something going on the screen that was more than just people talking to one another in a room. And when that was happening, the film had some really a nice direction. But when it's just dealing with the countless uh, dreams that Paul is having, or it's just trying to have some establishing shots when it comes to the landscapes, multiple shots of the desert, all this other stuff, or like Paul's bedroom or the training room and all this other stuff, or the Harkonnens' home world and everything. It's just so visually uninteresting. because of just how everything is just so dark and bland and dull and muted in terms of the color scheme. And the direction didn't seem like it took honestly as many risks as I'm normally used to when it comes to a Denis Villeneuve film. So other than the action sequences, what little bit there are of them, there's a lot of scenes that are just there featuring actors talking or having voiceovers or this other stuff, just establishing exposition. And I don't necessarily feel he's as adept or as good when it comes to showing and not telling compared to other filmmakers when it comes to movies with heavy exposition like this. And so it just becomes boring. It becomes something that you're not really as invested in as much when it comes to the visuals because everything just looks kind of the same. And like I said, he's not taking enough risks when it comes to the camera work that it helps break up the monotony. So honestly, I think it's one of his least impressive films when it comes to the direction. And I know that's a very controversial opinion because a lot of people think it's one of his best, but I don't think it comes even remotely close to what he did in Blade Runner 2049 or Sicario. The script is by John Spaeths, Denis Villeneuve, and Eric Roth. And like I said earlier in this video, I've never read the book. And honestly, if I had, I still would judge this film as its own separate entity and separate form of entertainment because I'm not one of those people that judges a film adaptation of a novel based on how accurate it is to the novel because a novel is a completely different medium of entertainment and storytelling. It doesn't have the same limitations that a film does. You don't really have to work around a budget when it comes to writing a novel. You don't have to work around, hiring a cast and a crew and dealing with what you can do effects wise and you also don't have to deal with things in terms of condensing conversations down or certain other aspects of the book or the novel so that you can create a film that is entertaining and interesting enough throughout so it's able to be an effective story on its own. You don't have to do any of that stuff when it comes to a novel uh, because there's no limitations except the ones that you form inside your head. So anything you can come up with inside your head, you can put on the page. And for the most part, other than maybe some notes from your, uh, um, I don't think producer is the right word, but from your publisher, the sky's the limit. But when it comes to a feature film, that's not the case. So the fact that it's got differences versus the book, or it's this or that, doesn't come into play here. I'm not judging the script based on that. What I am judging the script on is the fact that, much like the visuals, much like the direction in the movie, it's very monotonous and it becomes incredibly tedious and feels like it's played out and it's stretched out way too much. You're trying to stretch out what David Lynch and his writers were able to do in 98 minutes into a 2.5 hour long movie, and it really shows. And if you ask me what Lynch did in the 1984 film, even though it was critically panned and the film bombed and do as well critically or as financially as this, I think that everything that this film does story wise, that film does better or equal, except for maybe a few rare instances. Because so much of this entire film and this entire script is just the same stuff that you already saw in the first 98 minutes in the 1984 version of Dune. And the way that Lynch and his writers handled that, it was a lot more effective to me in terms of being consistently compelling and interesting because it was so weird, it was so surreal, and then it also knew when to really amp up the camp a little bit, take things less seriously, and also knew how to streamline things more and have more instances of showing versus telling. So much of the script is just telling the exposition, telling the character depth. And after a certain point, it becomes really exhausting. And you're looking up at your watch and you're like, really? Not even an hour has gone by? It feels like 3 hours have gone by already. Because there's so much of this script where nothing happens except exposition and plot development and character development. That's it. And it's crazy to me that there's all this time spent to character development, but so many of these characters feel empty and like they aren't really that fleshed out. Paul, especially Chani, and it's just one of those scripts where yes, it's got quotes from the novel apparently. Yes, it does do a decent job in terms of building the world of Dune and this cast of characters and setting up some form of stakes. But because of the fact that it's written in a way where it doesn't have a satisfying conclusion and it's just a series of different events that are just kind of stitched together, it just turns into a slog to sit through at times because there's not as much of an investment in the story. Because why should you be invested that much into the story? Because what is provided here either isn't that interesting or it's written in a way where it doesn't feel like there's enough of a central conflict that is presented in a consistent fashion. So there's a lot of moments where you just kind of uh fade in and out when it comes to the story and the script. Like it might get your interest of this one thing, but then it'll drop it and then it'll go to some other sort of aspect of the plot that's not as interesting, and so on and so forth. And so much of the script is padding to me that is just there to make it so it's 2.5 hours. The constant visions that Paul has of a potential future. I mean, there are way too many of these vision scenes that to me become repetitive because there's a certain point where it seems like it's the same vision that he's having, but it's just a little bit different than the last one in terms of the angle or the perspective or who the person is in the vision. And I understand why they're there, but there's an overabundance of these visions to the point where it makes the story as it unfolds feel even more fractured and even harder to connect with. Because okay, I'm kind of getting, oh, here's another series of visions again. I'm like, can we go back to those other scenes with these other characters? Why are we having the Paul Atreides vision hour again? I don't care about this. We already kind of get the gist of this. You don't need to show it like 5 to 10 times. At least that's what it feels like. It feels like it happens like a dozen or more times throughout the script. Probably doesn't happen that many times, but it feels like it. And there's not a lot of action. So that's another problem with this. You could have taken some action bits from the novel and rearranged them and moved them into this first part so you could have a little bit more when it comes to like the thrills uh, or the excitement. Because other than maybe the attack on Arrakis, there's like one little scene involving the spice harvesters. Not a lot happens for the first hour and 17 minutes of the movie. That's a long time to wait for anything substantial to occur when it comes to some sort of action sequence. I don't count the little brief training scene with Paul and his mentor Gurney, the weapons master. I don't count that as an action scene. It's not an action sequence. It's a training scene. And I know some people might say, well, David Lynch's Dune is kind of a similar thing. yes and no. It doesn't take as long to get to the attack on Arrakis, and it just feels like there's more happening even when there isn't an action scene happening because it's just so weird and just unpredictable and strange. Here, like the pain box scene, for instance, nowhere near as freaky and genuinely horrifying to watch as the one in the David Lynch version. It honestly felt really tame in comparison. Like the one in the David Lynch Dune, like that sequence was really intense. This was just like, okay, what did he get his hand stuck in a mouse trap? Like it just didn't really have the same impact. And it's just one of those scripts where, yeah, it does a decent enough job in terms of showing you who these characters are and their importance in the plot and why we should care about them, or why they are the center of certain plot points or certain subplots, and also building elements that will be fleshed out more and focused on more in a future installment, a future film, and a completely different story. And I think there is something to be said about that. Building the lore, building the terminology, the language, doing all this other stuff, establishing the setting, but it's a lot of fluff that you have to deal with, a lot of filler that you have to deal with on top of all of that. And it makes a lot of these other things about the script that I think are actually relatively well done come across as if they're kind of lost in the shuffle, or lost in the sand, or because it's just one of those things where it's almost like the movie just wandering around in the desert for way too long trying to find a point or a place where it can just stop and get a drink of water and relax. And by the time that happens, it's like, well, all right, well, no more movie, no more story. Uh, it's over. They're like, that's it? Really? It's over already? Like and apparently the initial plan for the script was different. They were going to have some more scenes with Paul and Shawnee uh, uh, when Paul and his mother joined the Fremen, but they decided to change it in pre-production. My guess is because of the pandemic. And that's another thing that I think definitely affected this script and this story. I think because of the pandemic, and I think the lockdown was over, but this was still shot during like COVID restriction kind of uh days in Hollywood. And so because of that, I think certain things were trimmed out, certain things were cut out, certain things were not focused on. Instead, the script focused on things that you could shoot more easily when it comes to COVID restrictions. And as a result, it restricted the script. It restricted the story in terms of what it was able to do. And it just made it feel like it was unfinished. I really did have the feeling after this was over that it was just not a full realized vision from the director or the writers. It was just semi realized. And that's not a good thing. A big reason why this film is just so middling to me is due to this screenplay. Way too much of it is padding, way too much of it is focusing on character depth and building the world and building the setting and building up to things, but you never see like a culmination to it. So it's giving you a case of blue balls. That's basically what the script is. But that's just me. That's just my personal take on the script. The cast, I think the cast is fine. Timothée Chalamet in this film in particular, I wasn't that impressed by. And I know what the intent is. He's supposed to be a really young kid and like 15 or 16 years old, is a teenager. So him being timid, him not really having that much of a commanding screen presence, that's by design, or that's the intent. But I think you can do that kind of take on a role and still have a presence about you, still have charisma, still have charm. And I just didn't really see that with Timothée Chalamet in this. He just came across like he was a poutier, whinier Kylo Ren from the Disney Star Wars movies, like teen Kylo. That's really the kind of vibes that I got. Teen Adam Driver. And when it comes to anything involving an action sequence, it wasn't believable at all. There were moments where he tried to be intimidating by just shouting really loudly, and it came across a little forced and kind of laughable. And it's just a performance that, to me personally, if you're not mesmerized by his TikTok looks, there's not much else there. And I can't say anything about Zendaya as Chani. She's in the film for 10 minutes and says maybe 10 lines of dialogue throughout the entire movie. There's nothing to say. You can't judge her performance because she doesn't act. She doesn't have anything to do that is anywhere near sufficient or significant enough to judge her positively or negatively. So there's not much to say about Zendaya in the film as Chani. And speaking of Chani, that's another thing I'm going to just briefly kind of mention. I forgot to mention this when it comes to the script. I didn't like that Chani and Paul were not featured more or focused on more, other than Paul having these dreams of her throughout the majority of the movie. The fact that they only meet by the time the film is almost over, I felt that that was a pretty big error on the writer's part. And I almost said writer's fart. And, that fits too, if you think about it. But yeah, I can't say anything about Zendaya. Rebecca Ferguson, the scenes where she's not crying, she was good. She was fine as Lady Jessica, but there were way too many scenes where she's just crying and bawling her eyes out. Oscar Isaac, I thought he was good. I thought he definitely did fit the part as Duke Leto. Had a good commanding presence to him. The few scenes that worked with Timothée Chalamet, I think, were the scenes between him and his father, played by Oscar Isaac. Josh Brolin as Gurney. To me, it just kind of felt like the same typical sort of role that Josh Brolin has played numerous times now. I couldn't honestly differentiate his take on this character from his take on Cable or any other similar character that he's played throughout his career. It's sturdy, it's solid, but it's not anything spectacular performance wise. And it doesn't have that novelty factor of like pre Next Generation Patrick Stewart that the 1984 film had with his performance as Gurney in that movie, complete with his space pug. But it worked fine. Stellan Skarsgård, he's gotten a lot of praise for his performance as Vladimir Harkonnen, Baron Harkonnen. But I don't know. I just felt like his performance was another thing that was just, it's kind of there. Like, he's intimidating, he's a force, but he's also barely in the movie, so there's not really much to say about his Baron Harkonnen. And he doesn't have as much fun playing the role as Kenneth McMillan did in the 1984 film. Like, you could tell that McMillan was having a blast playing that bad guy. You can't really tell that with Stellan. You're like, he's just showing up and he's doing his job, but you can't really tell that he's having a really good time playing this role. And he's not camping it up either. He's playing it more straight. And so it just makes it kind of a generic villain performance, if you ask me. Because say whatever you want about Macmillan, he was having so much fun with it that it was entertaining to watch this guy play this over the top, evil uh, villain. With Stellan Skarsgård, it's like, what is so memorable about this performance? I know a lot of people praise it, but I'm like, what is so memorable about it? Because I really don't see what's really that memorable about his take on Baron Harkonnen, other than him, handling it with the right amount of care, and he's taking it seriously, and he's not phoning it in, and he's definitely a presence. But honestly, I've seen more of a presence from Big Van Vader in the wrestling ring than I do from Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen in this movie. Doesn't really seem like that. He has a presence to him, but it's not as strong enough of a presence that I am genuinely intimidated by this character. So he comes across as kind of a weak villain. And I feel the same way about Bautista as Rabin, because his take on Rabin just seems like it's Drax, but with a screw loose. That's it. It's the same shtick and the same performance for the most part. Uh, can't really say a dang thing about Sharon Duncan-Brewster is Kynes. Doesn't have barely any scenes of dialogue in it. Same thing goes for Stephen McKinley Henderson as Thofir Hawat, who I think was the same. I think that character was played by Brad Dourif in the 1984 film. Like you could say a lot about Brad Dourif's performance in that. What can you say about Stephen McKinley Henderson? Uh, Chen was fine as Yue. Charlotte Rampling, she played the mother, Reverend Mother Moyam. I would say she was one of those other standout performers to me. She was just chilling, just very chilling and creepy and ethereal and just surreal, and she was more intimidating to me than Stellan Skarsgård was, and Bautista combined. Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho with his appearing and disappearing beard played the same character that he's played in everything. Like it just felt like he was playing Aquaman again, but this time it's Aquaman in the desert in outer space. Physically was fine. Had some good action moments, the few action moments in the film, like the fight in the hallway, but other than that, like not really the most impressive, memorable performance either. Javier Bardem I liked as Stilgar, but he also wasn't in the film that much, which was disappointing considering the fact that I really did like his performance as Stilgar and I wanted to see more of him. And what else can I say about Peter, David Dastmalchian? And actually, I think that might have been, Peter might have been the one played by Brad Dourif. Yeah, it was Brad Dourif. So it was a different actor who played um, Thurfear and Kynes. Thurfear, I think, was played by an older actor. It wasn't Brad Dourif. I got the two mixed up because I think they're both mentats, and it just kind of get confusing. Um, and that's really about it for the cast. And honestly, when I look at this cast, I'm just kind of, I honestly don't feel it's as strong as some people make it out to be. Like, there are some decent performers in this, but I don't think they're given the best possible script to work with. So there's only so much they can do because either they're not featured in the film that much or they are relegated to just being exposition dumps. Visually, the cinematography by Greg Fraser, when you can actually see what's on the screen and it's not too dark or too dingy, it looks fine for the vision that they were trying to do here. You got some sweltering visuals, definitely makes the film look like it's baked in heat, and it definitely has this otherworldly look and appearance to it at times that fits the film well. The editing by Joe Walker, I think, at times I think it could have used a little bit more energy. So there are scenes where it just features these moments that are a little too talky anyway, and I think with some editing that was a little more unique, could kind of break those scenes up a little bit and make them a little bit more interesting to watch and a little bit more engaging, but they're just kind of just stock standard kind of, oh, here's one scene with somebody talking and then we'll pan to another, person, and there's not really a lot of variety or uniqueness when it comes to those kind of scenes. And the most unique bits of editing you get is like the dream sequences or the very few moments of action that you get in the film. The music by Hans Zimmer, I know he won an Oscar for this, but I don't think it was deserved because I think this is one of his weakest scores. The throat singing was ridiculous. The bagpipes were out of place. I don't care if historically it could technically be accurate in terms of there being bagpipes throughout history in the Middle East. It doesn't fit with this movie. The bagpipes, when they start playing, it evokes imagery of Highlander and the Scottish Highlands, not a desert epic. It's just not a good fit. And other than maybe one or two pieces, everything is just droning, forgettable background noise, or just stuff that's out of place in a laughable fashion to me. So I really was not impressed by that score. And it's like 155 minutes, and it feels like it's 205 minutes because there's not as much of an investment in the story or the characters, except for like the base investment in story and characters. And because so much of the film doesn't really have much action, it just becomes a movie that just feels like it's stuck in the sand. And it's just what it is. It's just one of those stories and those and a film that when it's over, you're like, okay, all right, meh. Like that's really how I felt about it. And I didn't really have a desire to sit down and watch it again right afterwards because I was just so underwhelmed by the movie. But anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.